Good evening and welcome to Quorum. I'm Wilson Stribling. We're talking about legal matters on tonight's program, specifically the work of the House and Senate Judiciary committees. There are two such committees in each chamber, and their work has a tremendous impact on law and order in our state. This year, we've already witnessed these committees taking up some of the most controversial issues of the 2011 legislature. One of the most divisive issues of the 2011 session, immigrant enforcement, has roots in the Senate's Judiciary Committee, Division A. A bill by Committee Chairman Joey Fillingane makes failure to complete or carry an alien registration document a criminal offense, and it specifically outlaws the transport, concealment, or harboring of an unlawful alien. Immigrants' rights advocates claim the bill would legalize racial profiling, and some lawmakers warn it will prove expensive to implement at the local level. Senators passed the bill, but their counterparts in House Judiciary A amended the proposal to further penalize businesses that benefit from illegal workers. The full House passed that version of the bill. Now a conference committee is working on a final version. We discussed the immigration enforcement proposal with legal analyst Matt Steffi.
I think, culturally speaking, Mississippians are sympathetic to the point of view expressed in these bills and would like to rid, to the maximum extent possible, the state from undocumented workers. That said, these bills avoid the single biggest and most effective step that could be taken if we really wanted to rid the state of undocumented workers, which is to make it a serious crime, a serious felony, to knowingly hire undocumented workers.
Meantime, Nathan's Law became a point of contention. It would set new penalties for drivers who illegally pass a stopped school bus. House members passed their own version in January. It would allow aggravated assault charges in cases involving injuries. But several senators, the lieutenant governor, and the mother of accident victim Nathan Key all rallied against that bill. They called it weak on penalties, and they pledged to pass tougher measures in a Senate bill. Chris McDaniel on the Senate's Judiciary A committee authored that bill, and it passed a floor vote, sending it straight back to the House Judiciary A committee. Other issues have found stronger agreement among the judiciary panels. Senator David Blunt and Representative Richard Bennett introduced similar bills to curb teen drinking. Their legislation would prevent adults from allowing parties at a private residence where minors have obtained alcohol. Both bills have survived their deadline so far. Also, the governor has received a bill that would set new penalties for violating the state's open meetings and open records laws. The House is considering a Senate measure that bans texting while driving. And both chambers are considering bills that would ban a narcotic substance found in some bath salts. Those are just some of the topics we will cover on this edition of Quorum tonight. And joining us this evening, Senator Joey Fillingane is the Republican chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Division A. He represents Covington, Forrest, Jefferson Davis, Lamar, and Marion counties. Senator David Baria is a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Division B. He is a Democrat representing Hancock and Harrison counties. From the House, Representative Ed Blackmon is the chairman of the House Judiciary A Committee. He is a Democrat representing Madison County. And House Judiciary B Vice Chairman Bob Evans is here. He's a Democrat representing QUORUM, Covington, Jeff Davis, Lawrence, and Simpson counties. And gentlemen, we welcome all of you to Quorum.
Good evening. Thanks.
Of course, we want you to join the conversation as well. Our toll-free phone line is open. Dial 1-877-405-5247 with your questions for our guests. Again, that's 1-877-405-5247. You can also email your questions to quorum@mpbonline.org. We'll get to as many of those as our time allows tonight, and you can join the discussion on Twitter as well. Just add the hashtag Quorum to your comment and follow us at twitter.com/mpbonline. And gentlemen, I want to begin tonight with your reactions to the state Supreme Court announcement today. Governor Haley Barbour appointed Leslie D. King, to serve out the remainder of James Graves' term on the state's highest court. Graves, of course, recently joined the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. King had been serving as chief judge on the Mississippi Court of Appeals. He's also a former legislator, as you know. Representative Blackmon, what do you think of his appointment to the High Court?
I think it's an excellent appointment. Obviously, it goes without saying that he has tremendous experience, having served on the Court of Appeals and for a number of years as chief judge of that court. I think it would be an easy transition for him on the Supreme Court. I think the governor chose wise.
Senator Fillingane, what do you think of the appointment?
It's an excellent appointment. Governor Barbour has done us all proud. Judge King and now Justice King will be an excellent addition to the court. As Chairman Blackmon said, he has years of experience not only on the court, but he was a former House member as well and distinguished himself in service in the legislature. So he knows how to work the back rooms of the Capitol as well as the front courtroom in the Supreme Court. So I think he's an excellent fit.
All right, well, let's move on then to legislative affairs. We spoke earlier of the immigration enforcement bill. Its formal title is the Support Our Law Enforcement and Safe Neighborhoods Act of 2011. Chairman Fillingane, you authored that bill in the Senate. What's your goal here, and how do you think you'll achieve it?
Well, we've gotten a lot farther than many people thought we would. We've already passed an Arizona-style immigration bill in Mississippi. It is a secondary offense, unlike the Arizona version, so I think it's kinder and gentler and hopefully accomplishes having fewer illegal immigrants in the state of Mississippi. That's the goal, so that we can free up jobs for Mississippians who need those jobs and who want to be here and who are here legally. So the House has passed a version of it. There are some significant but a few differences between the two bills. We've now formed a conference committee, 3 members from the Senate, 3 from the House, and we'll be trying to work out the differences between the two versions here over the next couple of weeks, but I'm very hopeful.
Senator Baria, when this measure came to the Senate floor, what were your concerns about it?
Well, this bill was like a lot of pieces of legislation that we see. It has a real nice title, and if it did exactly what the title said, everything would be fine. But it went too far, I think, in requiring local law enforcement to do what is really a federal job, a federal responsibility to enforce immigration law. And the problem that I had with the bill was not that we were attempting to do something to stem the flow of illegal immigrants in this country, but that we were imposing not only additional burdens on law enforcement, but that we created a lawsuit that folks could file against law enforcement if they felt like they weren't adequately enforcing federal immigration law. So for that reason, I tried to amend the bill. When my amendment failed, I felt compelled to vote against the bill.
Representative Blackmon, House Judiciary A passed a somewhat different version of that bill. Why did you alter this legislation?
Well, first, I voted against it, even though it originated in my committee and passed out of my committee. I too had concerns about the unfunded mandate impact it would have on local governments who would have to enforce the law and pass on that cost to local police, local sheriff's department. I was concerned about that. I was also concerned about what I believe to be the real possibilities and probabilities that it result in racial profiling. But above that and foremost is this. I don't think we were going after, at least the Senate version went after the source of the problem. The source of the problem are businesses, individuals who hire illegal immigrants. I often compare it to this. If you take a hose pipe, turn it on, put a bucket in front of it, and keep filling, you fill up the bucket, every time it gets full, you throw the water out, and you keep doing that, all you're really doing is wasting your time. The water's until the water runs out. The best way to stop that water flow is to go to the source and turn the hydrant off. And the people who are creating the flow of immigrants into this state and other states are the people who hire them. Our bill seeks to stop that. We penalize the people who are hiring illegal immigrants. They are fined on a daily basis, and that's the way you enforce it. You hurt them in the pocketbook. If there are no jobs, there are no immigrants. Problem solved.
Senator Fillingane, what's your reaction to that response, to go after the employers rather than the immigrants themselves?
Well, certainly Chairman Blackmon has a very valid point, as does Senator Baria. You do have to penalize businesses, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't violate federal law. Unfortunately, although I agree with the sentiment that the House placed these very large fines against employers who hire illegal immigrants, you can't do that. It violates federal law. So what the House did actually is a violation of federal law, which the bill obviously is intended to help fully implement, not violate. The way we did it and the way Arizona did it, which does not violate federal law, is to remove the state licenses and permits that we issue to businesses to do business in the state. Without the permits and the licenses, they can't, in many instances, do business anyway. So you accomplish the same goal of penalizing the business, but you do it in a way that does not violate federal statutory law.
So does it violate federal law?
Well, you know, we don't care about that in Mississippi, and most states don't. What we want to do is we pass a law and we'll fight it out in court. That's been done. You know, the Obama's healthcare law, they argued that's in court too. The Arizona law is in court. So that's I don't fear a challenge to it. I think it is constitutional, and I think it's the most effective way to enforce immigration, to stop illegal immigration in this country and in this state in particular.
Representative Evans, let's bring you in here. How did you vote on the House version of this bill, and why?
I supported it, and one reason I supported it is I thought the bill that we did 3 years ago that put criminal sanctions on the undocumented workers here in Mississippi, I thought that was something, if we were willing to do that, then we certainly should be willing to put some sanctions upon the employers. I certainly agree with Chairman Blackmon with his hose and water analogy. That's exactly correct. I voted for it because I thought and still think that that is the only way that you're going to be able to do something about this problem, if indeed it is a major problem in Mississippi. As far as being against federal law, this bill supposedly was modeled after the Arizona law, which has in fact partially been set aside already by a federal judge in Arizona. That law will end up in the Supreme Court. So if ours is like that and that one is deemed to be unconstitutional, ours will too. So there's the sort of unconstitutionality or against federal law cuts both ways, and the only way you're ever going to know that for sure is once the Supreme Court, the top court in the land, makes this decision, and we'll all have to live with it at that point in time.
Representative Blackmon mentioned this, the idea of this being an unfunded mandate, that you're asking the local law enforcement to enforce these immigration laws. Who should be held responsible for enforcing immigration laws, if not the local law enforcement?
Well, it's a federal government responsibility. I think everyone would agree with that. And the sentiment behind Senator Fillingane's bill is a good one, that we ought to be doing everything that we can to assist in that effort. But what you don't want to do is push down more responsibility to our local folks without providing them the training and the resources and the reimbursement funds, frankly, because if we're going to put people in our city jails or our county jails, that costs money, and we need to make sure we pay for that. But on the issue of whether this is violative of federal law, what the House has done, imposing a penalty, it's ironic to me that we have sort of a selective disdain for federal law in the Mississippi legislature. If it's Obamacare, then we don't like federal law. And we need a committee to study whether we need to enforce the 10th Amendment. But if it's something like this, then we're going to respect federal law. So we sort of pick and choose which federal laws we like and which ones we're going to obey and which ones we don't. As someone pointed out, the Arizona law was declared unconstitutional by court before we ever brought this bill to the floor. So we didn't care about that at that point. We brought it out anyway and debated it for hours and voted on it. I have to point out the irony in some of the things that we do over there.
Let's turn now to Nathan's Law that would set new penalties against drivers who illegally pass school buses in school zones, or I guess anywhere where a school bus is picking up or letting off children. Chairman Blackmon, what's the latest on this measure? There was action on it just today, was there not?
Well, yes, and we passed it out of our committee today. But what we did, what we call the strike-all amendment on the Senate's version of the bill that came over to us when we put our bill in there. Let me say this: that I fully support the principles and the aspirations of the bill, and also for honoring a young man and his family who met his tragic death last year. But what I don't support is the penalty provisions in there. My main objection to the Senate version is that they seek to impose a penalty of 5 years in imprisonment for hitting illegally passing a school bus and striking a child. I firmly believe that it should be 20 years, but I've been accused of being I guess diluting the penalty versions of that bill. And I think when we go to conference, we may be able to work it out, because I'm going to stick to that. I'm going to stick to 20-year sentence, because aggravated assault in our state now carries a penalty of 20 years, up to 20 years. And I think a child's life is as much as anyone else in any other type of circumstances. And if we can get to some agreement, I don't care about the language, however we get to it, I want that penalty to be 20 years. And I think that we ought to be able to resolve our differences on that bill, at least I'm hopeful that we will.
Senator Fillingane, Senate Republicans in particular were unhappy with the House version of Nathan's Law. Why?
Well, number one, the family of Nathan was very unhappy with it as well. I think certain provisions of it were strengthened in the House version, and those provisions I'm sure we can come to an agreement on. Unfortunately, there were some provisions of the bill that actually lowered the floors on some of the penalties associated with this bill, and so you could actually have the unintended effect, I'm sure, of weakening some of the current provisions and penalties in the current state law. So I agree with Chairman Blackmon. I think there's no reason whatsoever that the two committees ought not to be able to come together and strengthen all the provisions and all the penalties, but not to lower the floors on any of them that currently exist.
Senator Baria, which version of Nathan's Law do you prefer, the House or Senate version?
Well, I don't prefer one over the other. I think they both have good points. It's something that we need to address, and I think we will. And I'm confident that the conferees on this will be able to work out something that satisfies the need to have a law to keep people from unlawfully passing school buses and potentially killing children. I think everybody's for it. It's just a matter of working out the semantics
and coming up with something that everybody can be happy with. Let's move on to something that where we do see some agreement. The Senate and House have both passed a bill that puts teeth into the state's open meetings and open records laws. We mentioned that in the opening piece there. Senator Baria, what does the bill do exactly?
Sorry, Wilson. I'm actually very proud of this bill, and it's something that I was asked to chair a subcommittee of the Senate Ethics Committee and work on, and we brought all the stakeholders to the table over a summer before last actually, and the Senate passed a bill that ended up dying on a technicality in the House, but we have a good product here. What the bill aims to do is to prevent folks from violating the Open Meetings Act, going into executive session or some other sort of closed-door meeting when they shouldn't. The penalty that was on the books for violating the Open Meetings Act was just too small to really get anyone's attention. It didn't have a deterrent effect, in my opinion, and I think the body agreed. And the other thing that was wrong with the way it was enforced is that the body itself was assessed the penalty rather than the individual or individuals that violated the law. So the two primary things that it does is it raises the penalty and it makes the person or persons who violated the act responsible for paying it. And we hope that that's going to get some folks' attention and change the way that, and it's not all bodies that do this, but there are a few from time to time that just sort of thumb their noses at the public and close doors when they shouldn't.
Because the ultimate goal with something like this, is it not, is to be more transparent, so folks can see exactly what's being done.
That's
so you can't do anything secretly.
That's the intention of the bill.
What about the separate bill that would include rural water associations under the Open Meetings Law? That was in the Senate Jud B committee, I believe. Do we expect that bill to advance?
You know, I'm not familiar with where that bill stands at this point. I'm not sure. I think Senator Fillingane is shaking his head back and forth here, so it probably is not. And frankly, I might need to let somebody else speak to that one.
Well, that one's not in Jud A, so I'm not sure. I can't speak to what's in Judiciary B. Senator Tolleson would be in charge of that one. It's not in Jud A. I checked all the bills this afternoon, and we don't have that one.
Gotcha.
Well, we sent it over to them, so we're waiting on them now.
Well, I'm sure Senator Tolleson will address it if he feels like it needs to be addressed.
Well, basically on that same topic, Representative Evans, you've authored a bill that would make it legal to videotape law enforcement officers, firefighters, conservation officers while they are on duty. What prompted a measure like that?
Well, the first thing is, actually, I think it's already legal. I think you have a constitutional right under the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to do this as a citizen. But I've had people come to me. I'm an attorney. I've had people come to me that say they were filming using their cell phone. Their friend was stopped for something, and they were across the road, and they decided to film using their cell phone, and they were threatened with arrest or very much intimidated by the law enforcement personnel that were there.
Because they were recording,
filming. Exactly. So I thought to myself, I thought about it, and it's a much bigger problem, particularly in the northeast part of the United States, where there have people that have been charged with felonies and are facing prison terms for this. So I thought, if it's not codified, which it's not specifically written in the Mississippi Code, then although I think it's legal, why don't we go ahead and write it out in black and white, and everyone will know that it is legal up to the point where you certainly can't interfere with the duties of a law enforcement officer or a fireman or a conservation officer or anybody else, but you certainly will have the unencumbered right to basically observe, is what it amounts to.
Because those rights already extend to the media. If a news crew were to show up, as long as they, as you say, don't interfere with what's going on, they're constitutionally allowed to videotape what's going on.
That's exactly right. And you have freedom of the press, of course, and we have the same thing. Freedom to observe is what it is. That's not a mentioned right into the Bill of Rights, but certainly it goes right along with it.
And I guess with the advent of so many other recording devices, I mean, all five of us sitting here, our phones probably can record video if we pulled them out and wanted to do that. And that wasn't the case just a few years ago.
I'd be surprised if all five of us couldn't do that. And you know, I've run into a lot of opposition on this. I offered this same bill last year, it passed out of the House with 83 or 85 votes, offered the same bill. It went to the elephant graveyard in the Senate. I like to call the Senate some of my bills. But it went over there and never saw the light of day again, so I offered it again in the Senate, in the House this year, and I was barely able to get it passed with a 61 to 58 vote. There'd been some hard lobbying out there from somebody, and I know for a fact that it's been a lot of law enforcement that do not like my bill. But then I asked them things like this. Well, a lot of them have cameras in their own cars. So if that's okay for them to film me, why isn't it okay for me to film them? But an even bigger point than that to me was, this is something, again, that I like to allude to as transparency. I am a criminal defense lawyer. I'm a public defender. I don't know how many times through the years I've had clients come to me and they had allowed the police to search their vehicle or their house or whatever. And they said, well, I didn't know I didn't have to. Or they told me, look, if you don't have anything to hide, then you won't mind us looking through your car, looking through your house. And believe me, this goes on all the time. And they didn't think they had anything to hide or didn't have anything to hide, and they allowed it. So I turned that back around on law enforcement. This is a two-edged sword. If you have someone out there filming and someone later alleges that you as a law enforcement officer did something out of the way, and you have a film that shows exactly what you did, or most importantly there, that you didn't do, then that's certainly helpful to you as an officer. So I hope this bill goes somewhere in the Senate other than where it went last year, but I'm not holding my breath.
Senators, any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know if the bill's been assigned to committee yet, but I think if it comes to Judiciary B, it'll get a fair hearing. I don't personally have any problem with it, but I don't control that process. I'm not the chairman.
I hear you. All right, well, let's move on now. Senator Fillingane, we're going to talk about a divorce bill. Another bill out of Senate Judiciary A would have added new grounds for divorce. It was the subject of a fierce debate on the House floor last Thursday. Senate Bill 2652. It would have allowed a spouse to file for divorce if he or she has been separated from their partner for at least 5 years. Now, bill's supporters said it would address situations where a husband or wife has fled an abusive relationship, but their partner has refused to end the marriage. The bill was defeated on an 81 to 39 vote. Senator, the bill came out of your committee, Judd A. What are your thoughts on the legislation, first of all?
Well, listen, I'll tell you, I think it's needed, and I appreciate Chairman Blackmon. I almost called him Senator Blackmon, but I was referring to his wife. I'm sorry. For bringing it up and giving it a hearing on the floor of the House. And I know any time in Mississippi, it's been my experience in my past 12 years serving, that you deal with issues related to marriage or to family, people always get very, very interested and are very much suspicious and on edge. But I practice family law as a large part of what I do when I'm not here in Jackson. And I can tell you there are instances, even though we have an abandonment statute as one of our grounds for divorce, where if one party leaves the other for more than 12 months, it gives rise to a cause for divorce for the person that got left. But what people, I think, that don't practice in this area maybe sometimes fail to realize, and I think Chairman Blackmon articulated this well on the floor of the House, he just didn't have a receptive audience, is that sometimes the person doing the leaving, usually the wife or the woman in the relationship, has been subject to some sort of physical, sexual, mental abuse to the extent where she no longer feels safe or welcome in that home, and so she leaves and oftentimes carries the children maybe with her. Well, under our current statutory scheme, she does not have a cause for divorce in the abandonment ground. The person that was left has the ground, but the person who did the leaving did not. So, of course, the critics say, well, we already have a ground called habitual cruel and inhuman treatment, where the woman possibly who left was subject to this habitual cruelty. She then has to get on the stand. She has to bring evidence forward, oftentimes under cross-examination from the person that got left, who denies all of it, of course, and says, I was raped, I was beaten, I was whatever. And in many instances, we've heard from victims of the situation. They've come in and said, why should I have to be reviolated the second time in front of open court, sharing all of the gory details of my existence with this person in order to get a divorce? Why can't, like in almost every other state in the union, I show that there's been a period of 3 or 5 years or whatever the period of time would be that the legislature would set, that I've been apart from this person with no contact whatsoever, and I should be entitled to get a divorce and move on with my life. Because ultimately you're not keeping the people together. You may keep them married on paper, but you're not keeping them happily wed and happily ever after. That's not the case. So you're just basically forcing them to stay married on paper, and ultimately they're apart, many times even in different states even. So I think it's a flaw in our law that we've tried to correct several times over the past few years, and so far we just haven't reached agreement from all parties involved in the legislature to get it done. But I'm hopeful that one day we can, because it's certainly, in my opinion, a very needed change.
Well, Representative Blackmon, you supported this bill when it came over to the House. What were some of the objections that were raised to it over there?
Well, I really think I probably did a poor job explaining, because the objections were far afield of what we were trying to do. Well, I won't really get into the objection, because I'd be singling out individual arguments, and I think those folks probably believe that they were legitimate. I agree with Senator Fillingane that in everything he said really about that, and I just hope that at some point we can convince enough of our colleagues on the House side to provide some relief to these probably hundreds of people, maybe even thousands, who are in this dilemma and sort of a everlasting marriage purgatory. And give them and their families some relief.
It's one of those issues, I guess, you don't really think about or can identify with or relate to until you or someone you know is involved in it. Representative Evans, what are your thoughts on a bill like this?
I certainly agree with Representative Blackmon and Senator Fillingane. We always have concern with this, and the four of us tonight on this panel happen to be lawyers. I think we all have personal dealings from a professional standpoint with this problem. But as far as I'm concerned, one of the arguments that seemed to be at least a strong undercurrent, if not out in the public, in the House last week was basically your marriage vows. You know, there's a scripture or something to the effect that says, let no man put asunder. Well, we're not trying to put asunder any marriage. The marriages that we're trying, the relief we're trying to give or to people whose marriages have already been put asunder. We're just trying to give them a way to have some livable life left after this unfortunate situation that's occurred in their marriage. Now, I support marriage fully. I've been married myself for in excess of 37 years, and if you know me, you wonder how my wife could have stood it, but nevertheless, I have been. So I'm not one of these that runs out. I'm not one of these lawyers that, hey, this is another bill that I'm going to make money off of because it's another ground for divorce. The first thing I do personally as a lawyer when someone comes into me to consult about a divorce is to ask them, have y'all sat down and talked about this between the two of you, or have you thought about some kind of counseling? And of course, I can't make them do that, but I encourage them to do that, particularly when they're children. But I support this, and I think you can certainly support it without being an ungodly atheist.
Senator Baria, where do you stand on this?
I stand along with my fellow panelists on this. Everything they've said is accurate. We've all addressed it in our practices, and you know, I don't handle divorce cases anymore because nobody is ever happy in a divorce. In fact, they're not. The only time they seem to be happy at all is when the divorce is final, and we're preventing people right now from finalizing divorces because we don't have a grounds that fits with what this bill would do. So I support Senator Fillingane's bill, and I hope we can get it done sooner rather than later.
All right. We have a question that has been posed to us via Twitter. The question is this: what do the members of the House expect to happen with the judicial pay raise proposal? That's from Around McNeil. Gentlemen?
Well, we're going to take it up tomorrow. It's a timely question, and we have tried to, by way of an amendment, which I'm going to propose tomorrow, to address the concerns that we've heard from our colleagues that they were concerned with, as well as other interest groups. And if the amendment passes, then I believe that the bill will pass. We are hopeful that it will pass. I think it's been, what?
Since 03.
What year?
2003 was the last
2003 was the last. Well, that was not a significant raise then.
And this is a raise for which judges? All judges across the board?
All judges. This would be your Court of Appeals, your Supreme Court, your trial judges, and even county court judges are included in the bill, in the amendment that we have tomorrow. And judges are true public servants. They're the third branch of government. And I think we have to do something about them having to come to us and hand in hand every decade or so asking for a raise, but that's the way it is.
I think there are a lot of folks who probably don't realize the legislature has the power to control their salaries.
Well, we do, and I wonder what would happen if the Supreme Court issued an order to us directing the pay raise. I think they can. Hint, hint, hint. But for now, we're going to try to see if we can get it passed on tomorrow. And those of you who are listening out there, judges, district attorneys, their assistants, and citizens, call your legislator. We'll be voting tomorrow.
All right. We have some calls on the line about immigration, which isn't surprising. It always brings up a lot of thoughts from all different sides. Let's go to Lance in Corinth. Lance, go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, I was wondering about what other bills may be possibly going through the House or through the Senate besides the Arizona type law or the any other types of laws that was talked about being proposed. What's something else that's going through the system right now?
Well, there have been a couple of bills that basically break parts of the omnibus bill out. I know there was a sanctuary cities bill that came to the Senate. There was a bill dealing with denying public funds for anyone who has not shown that they are, legally here in the state. But almost all those kind of bills that I think Lance was referring to, most of them at least are part of the larger bill that the two bodies have taken up already. So I don't really foresee doing a lot of piecemealing with those other bills necessarily, and Chairman Blackmon may disagree with that, but I think the bigger bill, the 2179 that we've been dealing with, covers most or a majority of those concerns, and hopefully we can work out an agreement. I'll just go back and say there aren't really that many differences between the House version and the Senate version. The one of the issues was addressed by Senator Baria earlier in allowing citizens to sue a municipality or a county, and he's right, he did offer that amendment on the Senate floor. It failed, but the House in their version has taken it out, and we are completely okay with leaving that out. So that takes out one of the two, I think, major differences in the bill, because we're not going to insist on that language going back in from the Senate end. I've spoken with Governor Bryant. He's fine with leaving that out. We do obviously have a problem with leaving language in that would be in violation of the federal law. So that's an issue that we'll have to try to work through. But really 80 to 90% of the bill that was passed in the Senate and the House is pretty identical. So I'm hopeful we can have some agreement.
All right, we have another email question this time. This is from Robert Wells. He says, on the topic of immigration, how hard or expensive is it to check and or ask for ID? It happens every time I get stopped by law enforcement. And that's one of the provisions of this bill, is it not, that it would give law enforcement the authority, if they stop you for something else, to ask for documentation. So he's asking how hard or expensive it is it to do that. There's some folks who are very opposed to that.
Well, I'm particularly opposed for, I guess, any number of reasons. First and foremost, the ID and stopping the check is just one aspect of it. Taking in, arresting, and housing, and taking care of the undocumented alien is the other aspect of it. And then what do you do? Can you force the federal government then to step in to do anything? I mean, I'm not, the reason that we are in the legislature pushing forward on this because the federal government is not doing anything, so they say. But the point is that this is a very expensive proposition undertaken, and I'm very fearful of racial profiling that would go along with that. I know, in fact, that racial profiling goes on in this state as well as other states. It's not just peculiar to Mississippi. And my constituents, many of them, are very fearful of having any other excuse out there that can be used to stop them on our highways.
You are watching Quorum on MPB Television and MPBOnline.org. We hope you'll call in with your questions. The toll-free phone number is 1-877-405-5247. You can also email us at quorum@mpbonline.org or follow us on Twitter. And if you are an educator, look for the Quorum page on our website, mpbonline.org. We have an education resource and activity guide for your classroom use. You can find it there on the website. A bill to ban texting while driving has passed the Senate. It's moved to the House. Senator Baria, what can you tell us about this bill?
Well, I can tell you that texting and driving is a problem. Okay, let's start with that, because I think everybody recognizes that we've all been driving down the road and seen somebody swerve over in front of us or off the road or sitting still at a red light after it changes to green.
We used to assume they were drunk.
Right.
But that's
well,
not, now
we can't assume that anymore. They could be doing any number of things with their personal computers, which is essentially what our phones have become. So we recognize there's a problem, and we're trying to do something about that. There were some very good questions asked of the chairman when we brought this bill out to the Senate floor about how would the law officer who's charged with enforcing this law know whether someone's texting or putting something in their calendar or looking at their phone to try to hit the button to answer it, which is not illegal. And there are some issues there. And then there are other issues with respect to what can the law officer do when he stops a person who he or she believes has been texting. Can they look at the phone? Can they go through the messages? Can they go through the emails and those sorts of things? So there are some issues. I don't know what the House intends to do with this bill, but I think there are some issues that need to be looked at very carefully, and I'm trusting that our chairman and the conferees will do that in conference committee, and then we're careful that we come out with a product that fits our need, which is to stop this problem, but doesn't create additional problems for law enforcement.
So how do we do that? You know, any thoughts on how you? Because those are all good points about how do you enforce it. We went through this to some degree with seat belts once upon a time. It seems logical that you'd make people wear seat belts. It seems logical that you'd tell people they can't text and drive, but it becomes difficult in the enforcement side of it, does it not?
Well, you know, government in Mississippi is growing and growing. It's already in bed with us now, and it's in our cars, and it's going to even be even closer to us now with texting, with the texting bill that's being considered. I'm frankly against the further expansion of government. However, I do think that it's not a good thing to be distracted at all from the business at hand when you're driving. That includes whether you're reading a newspaper, texting, having a strong disagreement with someone that you're riding with. I don't know how we can enforce this except that your cell phone becomes then eligible. If this bill passes, law enforcement will have a right to check for evidence, and your cell phone is evidence. They'll have a right to take your phone, to look in there, and what's probably going to happen, they're going to take it for further examination. I don't see police officers on the highway checking your cell phone for that. I think your phones can be seized at that point and maybe returned to you after they've gone through it and looked at the timing of placement of calls to see if you in fact violate the law. That's the only way it can be really legitimately enforced, because if you ask the person, were you texting? No, I wasn't. How do you prove it? Let me see your phone. I don't know if the citizens out there want that to happen or will tolerate it happening, but that's a real possibility.
Representative Evans, it's passed through House Judicial B, I believe, still needs the Appropriations Committee's approval. What's your take on this legislation?
I certainly agree with Chairman Blackmon and a lot of what he said. As luck would have it, I proposed a bill this year that has died and gone wherever my bills go. That would have worked with the problem about an officer looking through your cell phone. And my bill was such that if you were arrested for whatever crime you were arrested for and you had a cell phone, that unless the officer or the law enforcement went to a judge and got a search warrant, they could not go through your phone. Of course, that died of summary death. I think it was in my committee, as a matter of fact. I don't think I explained it too well either. But on the other side of it is, this happened to me, I believe it was a couple of weeks ago, within about 100 yards of the Capitol building here in Jackson.
You were texting while driving?
Well, I was. I believe my phone had beeped or whatever it did, and I looked down, pulled it out, and I broke my phone, so I have to open it up to see who's calling. and there was a red light right there by the Capitol. As luck would have it, the light was red, and I was almost at a stop. But when I looked down at my phone, I ran into the car ahead of me. And again, as luck would have it for me, it was a lobbyist there that had just left the Capitol too, that was interested in some of the things that I'm interested in. So we didn't have a lawsuit or anything like that, but it did happen to me. So I know it's a problem. I think perhaps what we need to do, at the very least, is to make sure this is an issue that people realize, in fact, is a safety issue, whether or not we make it a crime. Let them know, hey, this is something that, according to the studies I've seen, if you're texting, you're equivalent to being DUI. So something needs to be done. Maybe we can find a happy medium in it.
So Senator Fillingane, what's that happy medium? Any ideas?
Well, I don't know. I share some of the concerns around the table. I voted for the bill, but I'll be honest and tell you that I have some serious concerns about it, because really, if you take it to its logical conclusion, like Chairman Blackmon said, then we really probably should take up banning eating a Big Mac while you're driving down the road, like many of us do if we're in a hurry from courthouse to the Capitol or whatever, stop and get some fast food, and we're trying to eat our fries or our burgers. It's just as distracting. Or some of the ladies that, I've seen them in the morning going to work, putting their makeup on as they're traveling. I mean, there are a lot of distractions, and I don't know that we can necessarily outlaw or should outlaw them all. But on the other hand, I do understand. I mean, I've been guilty of it as well. You're trying to read a text or send a quick yes/no response, and it's clear that you are distracted during that period of time where you're doing it. But I think Representative Evans, hit the nail on the head that more than making it legal or illegal, what we really need to do is an education type campaign, like we do with the DUI issues that you see, Commissioner Simpson and others on the television saying this is bad, this is harmful, we really ought to not do this as citizens. Maybe something along those lines would be more beneficial than just saying this is illegal.
Well, it's an issue that didn't exist just a couple of years ago, or maybe last month for some people who now have their first smartphone. It seems like everybody has one now, and it's an issue in classrooms where there are new rules regarding whether you can have a phone in a classroom. So these are new things that I guess we watch other states do at the same time and see what ideas they come up with to handle things like this. Animal cruelty as another issue that I believe it comes up in some form or fashion tomorrow morning at the Capitol, and there are passionate feelings on both sides of this. What are your thoughts on whether animal cruelty in Mississippi should be a felony? It's one of those on the surface that people think of cats and dogs and the things that some people do to them, and it seems pretty black and white, but it's not in a lot of ways. And so let's start with you, Senator Fillingane. What do you think of making animal cruelty a felony, and why it's such a delicate issue? Well,
obviously the devil's always in the details. I think we can all, sitting around this table, agree that you ought not to, torture a house pet, whether it's a cat or a dog. But while we can all agree on that, we also understand Mississippi is still a very agrarian state. We have catfish farms up in the Delta. We have beef cattle farms. In my area in South Mississippi, we have lots of poultry farms. So any language that could be amended or construed to include banning killing a chicken, down at Sanderson Farms is going to be very problematic, or a catfish up in Ryan's Ear, or wherever the case may be. So we, while it seems not, logical to many people sitting here listening to this broadcast, why don't you just outlaw mutilating or torturing or killing, Fifi or Fido,
a cat or a dog?
A cat or a dog. They don't understand that the same code sections apply to all these other animals, that it can be easily expanded by the folks who don't believe in eating chickens or catfish or beef cattle. So you have to be very careful. But I hopefully think that all the parties, the stakeholders, have come together now this year, maybe more so than in years past, and that the language can be nailed down to just cats and dogs and leave it at that.
Representative Evans, why is it so difficult, and why it's very complex, but how can we simplify it, I guess? How can it be simplified enough to do what most folks want it to do?
It certainly, I agree with you. It seems like it would be a black and white issue. It's straightforward. Certainly hasn't turned out to be that. And in an aside with what Senator Fillingane said, I think we're more concerned with earthworms at Ryan's than we are catfish. But nevertheless, that may be an inside joke. I don't know. But I have had literally hundreds of emails asking me to support this bill.
Which would essentially do what? What? Bottom line, the bill for us, what would it do?
It's my understanding that what the bill will do tomorrow, and I think there's going to be an amendment, perhaps even a strike all. I'm not sure because I'm not on the Agriculture Committee that was dealing with it. But from what I understand, what will be proposed tomorrow will perhaps be that if you mutilate, or these other verbs that they're using, a dog or a cat, the second time, in other words, it takes a second offense for this to become a felony. There's Mississippi is what we call a one free bite case. That means something to lawyers, which essentially means that if you get bitten by a dog and they didn't know that their dog had really a propensity to bite, then that first bite you're not really responsible for. That sounds crazy, but that's the one free bite deal in Mississippi. I guess what this amounts to is one free mutilation. I don't know. I hate to put it that way, and I'm not trying to be comical, but that's essentially what it is. This is what we're going to end up with. We call them enhanced penalties, which is the same as on some other felonies in Mississippi or crimes in Mississippi. If you do a third shoplifting within 7 years, the third shoplifting is a felony. If you do a third DUI within 5 years, the third DUI is a felony, although the first and second were not. So this bill, I think, will be analogous to those. It's not going to suit a lot of people, but I think, again, a lot of times, the longer you stay up here in the legislature, you learn that you have to find a happy medium somewhere. This one may not be particularly happy, but I think it's either going to be something akin to that or it'll end up being nothing.
I was going to say, do you think what are the chances that something comes out of it?
I don't think it'll be anything more severe than that, and if we can't agree on that, I don't know that anything will happen with it.
Representative Blackmon?
I believe agree with Representative Evans on it. You know, I would support his the version that he just explained.
The gradual penalties.
The gradual penalties, because as Senator Fillingane said, it is the devil's in the details. You know, I don't have any dogs now. My kids growing up had dogs. The closest thing that we have would be koi fish. And koi fish are nice, beautiful fish that cost, you know, about what a dog would cost if you bought it. And I certainly want them protected too, if we can include that in the amendment.
Cats, dogs, and koi fish.
Right.
Get to work on that one. All right, we have another caller on the line from Raymond. Bob with a question now. Bob, go ahead.
Yes, Mississippi law requires all drivers to have liability insurance. I believe that if a driver does not have liability insurance, he should not be able to collect damages from the person who abides by the law and carries liability insurance. Because if the situation were reversed, the law-abiding person would likely not be able to collect damage from the uninsured driver.
Gentlemen, you're all attorneys. Who wants to take that one?
Well, I think we all are aware now that there's a bill that's making its way someplace which addresses that issue, and that bill would prohibit you from being able to get a tag for your automobile without first showing proof of insurance, and it also would allow the law enforcement officer to check the VIN number of the vehicle when the vehicle is stopped for whatever reason to determine whether or not there's insurance. Now, I had some problems with that version that made it through the House, but it passed. And
because law enforcement can also already ask you for proof of insurance, but this bill would make it impossible to get a tag unless you have insurance.
Right, and you check the VIN number, and you'd be able to say the Secretary of State, I think, often is supposed to have somebody on duty 7 days a week to provide information. That's the version that came from the Senate. I think we passed it that way too. So I understand and can empathize with the caller's position on that, and I'm sure a lot of people have been in that position. And we're trying to find ways to improve our enforcement in that area.
Anyone else?
Well, this is an example of another one of those government mandates that we hate so much. We've mandated that folks need to have insurance, and there's a very good reason for it. I understand it completely. But that's the fact is that every now and then we like the government just to mandate that we do something or other for the protection of ourselves and others, and this is one of those examples. This particular bill that Representative Blackmon just referred to, which would require proof of insurance before you could get your tag, I opposed for the sole reason that my tax collector from back home called me and said, this is not good. This will eliminate the ability of folks to be able to get their tags online, which a lot more people are doing these days.
Now, how is that? Because you couldn't prove online,
correct,
I guess, that you have your insurance.
That's correct. Not without a lot more changes in the law. I mean, I guess there are folks right now who have scanners at home who could scan their insurance card and do it that way.
Certainly not the majority.
It's certainly not the majority. Not even the majority in Jackson, I would imagine. And you think about, again, this is a very rural state. I would venture a guess that 75% of the people in the state don't have that capability right now. So that's an obstacle that we would throw up. And then the other problem that my tax collector had is that he felt like this was going to create additional burdens, unfunded mandates, if you will, on his office that he would have to do. He would have additional responsibilities, and he would get no additional resources to undertake those responsibilities.
Something
so
to think
there's
about.
Always another side to the story.
Certainly, sometimes multiple sides. Let's talk about something we talked about in the intro tonight, and that's this bill that would prohibit adults from allowing their children or someone to have a minor to have a party at their private home where they can have alcohol. Is this what does the bill do that the law doesn't already do?
Well, what the law, the bill that passed in the House addresses it head on. I think it came out of our committee. That is a problem. You know, in my experience as a lawyer, I'm thankful that it has not come up often, but it's come up sometimes. And I think until we address that and meet it head on, there'll be some parents who think it's okay to have parties for their kids and have them over and just let them. It usually happens when they're juniors and seniors in high school. They're feeling their need to express themselves in an adult way, and some parents endorse that. We don't prohibit parents from sitting down if they want to in the privacy of their home and sharing. We don't criminalize sharing a beer if you want to do that. I think that's still wrong, but that's my personal opinion. I don't share that as a legislature. But we are trying now to just put some teeth in the law that will perhaps stop that from happening, because it can have very tragic consequences.
Senator Baria, your thoughts on this? Because I guess the argument from the parents' standpoint is we'd rather have we know our children, for good or for bad, are going to do this. We'd rather have them under our roof where we can watch them and make sure they're not driving or getting into other trouble. I guess is the justification that I've heard from folks who oppose this.
Well, I understand that justification. I'm a father of a 13 and 14-year-old daughter right now, and so I can understand. If I thought they might be drinking, would I rather they do that under my roof, under my supervision? Absolutely, but it's still a very, very bad idea to invite other folks' children into my home and provide them with alcohol, because you simply can't. It's just wrong, first of all, but secondly, you simply can't control that. They can leave your property. They could injure themselves on your property. They could get in a car and go drive down the road and hurt someone or themselves. And so it's just unbelievable to me that there are adults out there that would entertain such a party and provide alcohol to children, their own and to others underage. But apparently it's going on, and it's fairly widespread from what we're hearing. And so this is an effort to stop that and to criminalize that behavior if they knowingly engage in that behavior. Now, we're not talking about if you had some friends over and you were watching the game and your child sneaked out and grabbed a beer and went and hid somewhere and drunk that beer. The language in the bill, as I understand it, and the last version I saw, said that you have to knowingly allow that to happen.
So you're essentially holding the party or hosting the party there, and
exactly.
You know what's going on.
And that's just wrong, and we ought to stop that behavior.
Senator Fillingane, your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I would just echo what Senator Baria said. It's the standard, which didn't start out that way, but I know as it left the Senate, and I assume as it left the House, we took out all the reckless disregard and all that kind of language and said knowingly. So in order to prosecute that parent, the law enforcement would have to prove beyond any doubt that that person not only that it happened, but they knowingly allowed it to happen. They just didn't walk away and leave, and then it happened after the fact. They were socially hosting this party with alcohol involving minors, which, is all the gentlemen have said, is a really bad idea. And maybe this would send the right message that that's not a smart thing to be doing as a parent.
Because apparently it happens, or there
It
wouldn't be
does.
legislation drawn up
That's right.
to look at it. All right, here's another email question. Let's look ahead now. We're roughly midway through the 2011 session. What sort of developments should we expect as the session draws to a close? What are we going to remember from this session?
Two things that we haven't addressed yet: budget and redistricting.
Minor things like that.
Yeah, we have not addressed those. Usually at this time of the year, our attention would be turning to the appropriations process. This year we have the added feature of redistricting. So those will
Which
be
is
the
a
two.
huge added feature.
It certainly will be. It's going to impact everybody in the legislature, every citizen in the state, just as the appropriation process does. So I see those as two remaining big issues that we have to address.
Representative Evans, what's going to be the biggest fight regarding the budget?
Well, the biggest fight has always been this is my 4th year up here. What can we do to tighten down on the governor's attempts to cut as much out of every budget as he possibly can? And I think that's what the House is trying to do, particularly with education. Education is the #1 priority with me and always has been. And that we haven't heard a lot of that up to now in this session, but I'm certain that it will rear its head here shortly.
Almost out of time. Senators, any thoughts on what the biggest hurdle in the budget process is going to be?
I agree. I think it's probably going to be surrounding education and how much we underfund education, because we're probably going to underfund MAEP, and it's just a matter of how much we underfund it. There are those of us who want to see us fully fund MAEP every year, and this year being no different. And there are those who just, that's not a priority for them.
Senator Fillingane?
Well, I would just say I agree the budget battle will largely center around the education budget simply because it's the largest budget. It gets about 62% of our discretionary funds, but we're not going to be writing hot checks just like the people listening at their homes. They don't go around writing hot checks, so we can't spend what we don't have.
Without getting in trouble anyway.
Right.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for tonight. I'd like to thank our guests. We also thank you for joining our discussion tonight. And next week, we'll turn to the state's redistricting process on Quorum. Stay tuned now for the television premiere of Southern Remedy with Dr. Rick DeShazo. The topic is obesity and its powerful impact on the people of Mississippi. I'm Wilson Stribling. Good night.